There is a number that every Brazilian child learns before they learn to read. 5. 5 World Cups, more than any nation on earth, more than Germany, more than Italy, more than Argentina. And yet, the one Brazil team that football still considers the greatest of all time. The one squad that coaches still put on projector screens in 2026 and say, this is what football is supposed to look like. That team never played in a World Cup with 48 nations, 104 matches. And a stadium in New York City. They never had to. And here's the question that nobody asks out loud, because the answer is terrifying. What if they did? Not the 2002 team, not Ronaldo and Ronaldinho and Roberto Carlos, as brilliant as they were. The 1970 team, Pelé, Jairzinho, Tostão, Rivelino, Carlos Alberto. The squad that didn't just win the World Cup, they played football in a way that had never existed before and has never been fully replicated since. That team. In 2026, against the best players alive today. What actually happens? I'll tell you. But I need you to understand something first, because this scenario doesn't go the way anyone expects it to. Not even close. The year is 2026. 48 teams. The biggest World Cup in the history of the sport. Host nations spread across 3 countries. And somehow, through whatever alternate logic this reality operates on, the 1970 Brazilian national team, not an approximation, not a tribute, the actual squad, is placed in Group A. The reaction is immediate. Within 24 hours, the FIFA alternate reality selection draws more online traffic than any sporting event announcement in history. 3 separate nations file formal objections, not because they think it's unfair, but because they genuinely don't know how to prepare for this. Coaching staffs across the world pull out footage that most of their players have never sat down to watch properly. Because here is what most people don't understand about the 1970 Brazil team. They weren't just good, they were structurally ahead of their time in a way that modern football is still not completely processed. But while the world panics about what's coming, something is happening inside the Brazil camp that nobody outside it knows about. And it won't become clear until the quarterfinals. But when it does, it will change everything. Group stage. Brazil versus a European side who finished in the top 8 at the last World Cup. The side built on press intensity, tactical discipline, and physical dominance at every line of the pitch. The European manager's pre-match press conference is confident, almost too confident. He talks about defensive compactness, transition speed, high-line pressure. He doesn't mention Pelé once. The match kicks off. And within 11 minutes, something happens that makes every analyst watching fall completely silent. It isn't a goal. It isn't a tackle. It's a movement. Tostão drops deep, pulling the defensive line with him. Jairzinho makes a diagonal run that the right back follows, instinctively, correctly by every modern defensive principle. And in the exact moment both movements happen simultaneously, a corridor opens in the center of the European defense that is 6 yards wide and completely empty. Rivelino plays the ball. Pelé arrives. 3 touches later, the ball is in the net. The goal is beautiful. The goal is important, but it isn't the point. The point is this. The movement that created it took less than 4 seconds from start to finish, and it was built entirely on the assumption that the opposition would follow the decoy runners. They always follow the decoy runners. And here's what nobody watching in 2026 fully understands in that moment. The 1970 Brazil team discovered this in training. Not against video analysis, not against data models, by playing football obsessively until they could feel where the space would be before it existed. That is not something modern defending is built to stop. Because modern defending is built on information, on positional data, on pressing triggers and shape recovery and numerical superiority in transition. It is extraordinarily sophisticated, but it only works against things it has been designed to handle. It has not been designed for this. Brazil win the group stage opener 4-1. Jairzinho scores 2. Pelé scores and assists. And after the match, one of the defeated players, a Champions League winner, a man who has played in 3 World Cups, sits in the post-match interview and says something that will be repeated everywhere for the next 2 weeks. He says, "It felt like playing against mathematics. Not football. Mathematics." But here's what that player doesn't know. Here's what nobody watching from the outside knows. Inside the Brazil camp, there is a problem, not a tactical problem. Something quieter. Something that the manager has been watching for 3 days and hasn't discussed with anyone yet. The 1970 squad was built in a world where players walked to matches, where nutrition science was 30 years behind, where recovery between fixtures was understood in completely different terms. 48 teams means potentially 7 matches to win the World Cup. The 1970 squad played 6 to win theirs, 1 extra match, against the deepest, most physically conditioned squads in the history of the tournament. At the time, nobody on the outside thinks this matters. It matters. Round of 16. Brazil face a South American side, young, fast, built entirely around vertical transition football. A team that presses relentlessly, recovers the ball within 3 seconds, and runs further per match than almost any team in the tournament. The first 20 minutes are unlike anything in the group stage, because this team doesn't follow the runners. They stay compact, they accept the space behind, and trust their recovery pace to close it. For the first time in the tournament, Brazil's positional traps don't fully open. The match stays level until the 67th minute, and then Carlos Alberto, the captain, a man who in 1970 scored arguably the most celebrated goal in World Cup history, makes a decision. He pushes forward. High. Higher than any right back is supposed to go in that system. He receives. He crosses. Jairzinho heads it home. Brazil win 2-1. But something happened in that match that the post-match analysis doesn't capture. Something the cameras caught but the commentators didn't fully explain. In the 81st minute, Pelé was walking, not jogging, not recovering. Walking. And the one manager in the quarterfinals was watch every single second of Brazil's footage, who has built his entire pre-match preparation around not what Brazil do, but what Brazil will do when it becomes difficult. He saw it. He's been waiting for it. Quarterfinals, Brazil versus France. Modern France. The France of 2026. A squad built with a depth of talent that previous generations couldn't have imagined. Fast, technically brilliant, physically extraordinary. 2 forwards who can each individually change a match in a single moment. And a manager who, the night before the game, tells his team something that sounds almost disrespectful. He tells them not to press Brazil in the first half. Let them play. Let them move the ball. Let them set the tempo. Let them feel like they're controlling the match. Because in the second half, when those legs have covered another 6 kilometers of orchestrated movement, when those lungs have processed another 45 minutes of football played at an intensity that 1970 scheduling never demanded, then France press. Then France accelerate. Then France becomes something the 1970 squad have never faced. Not because they're more skillful, but because they're fresher. It sounds like a strategy that could go wrong in 100 different ways. For 53 minutes, it is going wrong. Because Pelé, even at 80%, even tired, even walking between moments, is still operating on a plane that France's defensive structure cannot fully account for. Pelé scores in the 31st minute with a piece of improvisation so instinctive that the goalkeeper is still processing what happened when the ball hits the net. Brazil lead at halftime. The plan is falling apart. And then the second half begins, and France do exactly what their manager said. They press. Not one trigger, not one moment. Everywhere. Continuously, relentlessly. Every Brazil player, every touch contested, every second of possession made expensive. The Brazil midfield, brilliant, creative, technically immaculate, begins to slow. Not because they want to, because the machine has been running since June and the parts are asking for something that isn't available anymore. France equalize in the 64th minute, the stadium goes insane, and in the 69th minute, Pelé receives the ball 30 yards from goal, turns and shoots. The goalkeeper saves it. For the first time in the tournament, Pelé's shot doesn't go in. The match goes to extra time. And in the 109th minute, France score. Final score, 2-1. The 1970 Brazil squad, the greatest team in the history of football, placed across time and dropped into the biggest tournament ever constructed, goes home in the quarterfinals. And for 2 days, the internet cannot decide how to feel about this. Because Brazil didn't lose because they were outplayed. They were never outplayed. They lost because football in 2026 is a sport that demands something the human body simply cannot sustain across 7 matches in 30 days. The gap isn't skill. The gap is infrastructure. And that gap, that specific gap, is the most uncomfortable thing in modern football to confront. Because it means the question, who is the greatest team of all time, cannot be answered with the tournament result. It can only be answered by watching 11 men in yellow and blue move a football in ways that still, 56 years later, coaches put on a screen and say, this is what football is supposed to look like. France went on to win the 2026 World Cup, and in their victory press conference, the French manager was asked what the key moment of the tournament was. He didn't say the final. He didn't say the semi-final. He said the quarterfinal against Brazil. Specifically, the moment in the 53rd minute when the press began to work. When he saw, for the first time, that it was possible, that was the moment, he said. Because if we could stop them, we could stop anyone. The greatest team in football history walked into 2026 and made the best team of the modern era prove something to themselves that they didn't know they needed to prove. That is not a defeat. That is a gift. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the greatest teams in football history were always supposed to do. Not just win, make the game bigger than it was before they arrived.